How common is cyberbullying in Massachusetts? These are studies we do where we track this. We track it year to year, and every year we get better at asking the questions. And basically the way we did it this past year is we took what was called in this research sort of the laundry list approach, which is we sat down and we thought up every way that we had seen kids cyberbully other kids. And we asked the kids about all those different ways. And overall, we found very high victimization rates. 80% of the girls and 53% of the boys told us that something had happened during high school, at least once, that some incidents had occurred. And so it was clear that this is now becoming so common that it's almost normative for it to occur, particularly among girls. And girls were a particular focus for our research this year because we began to notice really significant gender issues. About 25% of the kids told us that they had been a cyberbully. Now, just to give you a basis of comparison, when you look at a school and you estimate what percentage of the kids are actually bullying in person, you usually come up with about 5 to 7%. So compare that to 25%. And certainly, I think we all agree that there's a lot of bullying that goes on in person that we don't detect and that these studies don't pick up. But having said that, I think that what's going on online to a greater extent year by year seems to be driving what the kids are actually doing in person. And it's not, interestingly, just driving in-school behavior. So we're seeing an increase in other criminal justice issues like flash mobs and problems like that that are all driven by online communications. If you don't know what flash mobs are, look them up, because you all want to know what a flash mob is. Because if it happens in your community, you want to be able to react. What kinds of cyberbullying? The most common thing is the rumor mill. That's the issue. That's the most common thing, is the rumor mill. The rumor mill is always bad with teenagers. It's always been bad. But now it's being driven by this massive engine. And nobody, of course, is talking to children about this, but this is one of the issues we have to do. You may notice that when we're looking at sexting other people, that only the boys registered on that particular item. The girls did not, which is one of the gender differences we picked up. But we also picked up some very interesting data about sexting, which I'll show you in a minute. Cyberbullies do what they do online primarily because they feel really safe online. They feel like you will never be able to track them down. They don't know what an IP address is. They don't know what that is. For the most part, they don't even know what an ISP is. They're very ignorant about these things. They think that when you're online, you're absolutely untraceable, rock solid. And you know, what I'd really love to do is get up in front of a group of kids and trace one of them live right there and show them, you know, how it's done. But they really think that these things can't be done and that they're totally anonymous. Not seeing the victim means that they don't have to worry about being caught. They don't have to worry about feeling guilty. They don't have to get any of the things that would stop people in normal behavior from abusing each other. What is the immediate motive? One of the things we ask the kids is, when you were a cyberbully, we pull out the kids who are the actual cyberbullies and we study them some more. And we said to them, when you actually sat down to do this or stood up to do it, however you were doing it, what were you thinking at the moment? And the immediate motives for boys predominantly was that they thought it was cool or they thought it was a joke. They thought it was going to be funny. And I'm a mother of boys myself, and I can tell you this answer makes perfect sense to me. This is no great surprise. The girls were more likely to say that, slightly more likely to say that they were angry, and this is what happened. This is a major issue that we see in schools today, and this has got to be a major focus of our research with these kids and our work with children, is saying to them, when you are angry, do not go online. Because what kids think today is that going online is the natural thing to do when you're angry. They think it's the logical thing to do when you're angry. And when they do that, they blow up and escalate the whole event, and it ends up in your lap. So they have to learn how to diffuse events and not just escalate them. And that is one of the single biggest problems that we're seeing in schools. Peer pressure came up a third, but it was it wasn't quite as distant as I thought it was going to be, frankly, so that's why I put it on the chart. Boys predominantly get bullied and harassed and stalked and other things on gaming sites, But interestingly enough, they didn't see this as such a problem. And it was really, the boys reacted really different to these events than the girls did. Really different. And that is, I thought, was really, really interesting. When we talked to the kids who were victims, and we said, why do you think these people were doing this to you? What do you think their motive was? The boys overwhelmingly said, oh, they were just trying to be cool, they were just trying to be funny, and then they turned around and they did exactly what their local police usually recommended, which was to block the kid, to ignore the kid. They were able to follow that advice very, very closely. But the girls interpreted it totally differently. The girls saw everybody who picked on them as being mean, as being cruel, as going after them personally. And they were the ones who were less able, much less able, to take advice from law enforcement or to know what to do in those situations. And so we saw the girls as being particularly needy in this area. It was really interesting because overall the girls were much more sensitive and attuned to what was going on. But on the other hand, it seemed like the boys, almost by being not so attuned to what was going on, they were able to sort of cope with it better. And they really interpreted things differently. One of the boys said to me that when you're in a gaming situation online and somebody goes after you, he said, it's like trash talking on the field. They're just trying to break you psychologically so they can win the game. It's nothing personal. And I thought, well, that's a really constructive way, actually, to interpret this. But the girls, of course, who weren't getting into these problems in gaming sites, they were getting to them in social networking sites, totally interpreted it differently. And it was really different. And it really showed us some of the ways that we need to intervene with girls. Cyberbullying is not a clean issue. Most of the kids who are victims are also cyberbullies, and vice versa. That they tend to go both ways. And this tends to feed upon itself. And it's really messy. But we do know that girls and boys tended to do different things. So when females were cyberbullies too, they tended again to spread rumors. That was again the #1 thing, or to put up mean comments. When the boys were cyberbullies though, overwhelmingly they were sexting other people, or they were posting harassing or threatening comments. The sexting issue has emerged. And this is really a good example of why we must do research on these issues. Because through our field work, we were picking up the same vibes that everyone else has been picking up, which is that sexting was sort of this fun, sexy behavior that kids were engaging in. They weren't realizing about federal and local statutes. And they were it was sort of a, you know, an electronic, I'll show you mine, you show me yours kind of thing. And it was fun. But when we actually started talking to kids about what they were using sexting for in the research, an entirely different picture emerged, and much more troubling, frankly. And so this is a good illustration of why it's so important. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. What are the challenges? Well, networking problems, social networking problems are very, very common. And I know the next speaker is going to talk about that. Cyberbullying is not separate from what goes on in school. Any incident that you're called to for a school, you should investigate and you should consider online feeders. There are almost certainly there. The kids may deny it, at least initially, but I'm telling you that most of what goes on in schools today is being fed and supported by what is going on online at home. And that is a very important element. You also want to look at it the other way around too, as has been evident in other high-profile cases that have emerged recently, that it's not often the case where it's just one or the other, that these things tend to coexist. The other problem we have is that kids are not talking to us about this. That's a very serious problem. We started talking about the importance of reporting from a public safety perspective in the 1990s, when, as I'm sure all of you recall, we had a string of terrible homicides in schools, group homicides, related to bullying behaviors. And at that point, it became clear to us that we can't just look at it and say, well, if they don't report to us, they don't report to us, there's nothing we can do. That is a luxury that public safety cannot tolerate.